everyone, everywhere around this planet. Guess what? We broke through 163,000 subscribers last week. And I got this little guy who is apparently over my mic, according to Brad. Oh, I wanted to show you. Remember he looked like a badger last week, and he and Fluffy both. It's really wonderful. They enjoy it a lot. It's like they've gone back to being kittens, and they have pink and red in their skin that can turn into ulcers if you don't do this. So I wanted to see them and show them to you. And I'm going to put Chocolate down. Fluffy will probably be jumping up here. I'll show you him too, but he's still got his big tail. And there you go, baby. I love those kitties. Now, what I was leading off with, without realizing that I was smothering my microphone, is that we did break through 163,000 subscribers this past week. And let's keep going for 175,000 on the spring equinox next month. There was good news this week that at least 40 million doses of COVID vaccine have been given in the United States, of which 17 million have gone to people over 65. 44 states are reporting sustained declines in new cases, but unfortunately, deaths remain high. At the same time, the UK Kent mutation is now spreading rapidly in the United States, doubling every 10 days, according to research by the genomics company Helix, posted Sunday, February 7th, in the peer-reviewed scientific journal medRxiv. The new research evolved from watching the B117 Kent variant show up in Portugal and Ireland, spreading 40% faster than COVID-19. And those countries, quote, observed devastating waves of the coronavirus. The study shows that the U.S. is on a similar trajectory as other countries where B117 rapidly became the dominant SARS-CoV-2 variant. And supporting this research, 98% of the mutations in the United States so far have been the highly contagious UK Kent variant. The CDC predicts that B117 will become the dominant COVID strain in the United States by next month in March. That means there should be or could be another surge of new cases and deaths that will go up this spring. And coming right behind is the highly contagious South African variant. As of this week, there have been 948 confirmed U.S. South African variant cases in the states of South Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia. This date of February 10th, 2021, the United States is reporting nearly 28 million cases and 483,200 deaths as of this evening of February 10th, 2020. So, as tired as we all are of this age of COVID, now is the time to be even more aggressive on your protection of yourself and of other people. Please try wearing 2 or 3 masks as this new variant or 2 start to come to every state. Go back to using hand sanitizer all the time. Wear gloves on top of that if you're going out to the post office or someplace. And stay away from crowds for yourself, for the people that you love, the people that love you. Now remember, it was 2 months ago in my December 9th, 2020 Earthfiles YouTube broadcast that I reported about this strange asteroid named Yugu that is only about a half mile wide and filled with carbon. That week on December 5th is when the Japanese spacecraft Hayabusa 2 returned to Earth with rock samples it had gathered in 2019 from Yugu and dropped them onto the Australian desert in South Australia this past December. Now, only a couple of months later, Japan scientists report puzzling evidence of high heat on asteroid Yugu. Scientists at the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency have been studying the carbon-rich material and now report the unusual asteroid was exposed to extremely high temperatures, up to 572 degrees Fahrenheit, both on its surface and underground, possibly caused by an internal source of heat or planetary collisions rather than heat from the sun. The scientists say the soil underground would not reach such a high temperature from sunlight alone. The implication is an internal heat source inside the asteroid, either in the distant past or now. Another mystery. You all know how much I would like to see the truth that we are not alone in this universe finally be reported in huge headlines around the planet. And that is the truth. And all the power brokers controlling this planet know it's the truth. And those power brokers are not all Homo sapiens sapient, according to a new book by attorney Terry Lovelace. 2 years ago, on February 4th of 2019, I posted a 3-part Earthfiles news update about the release of Terry's book entitled Incident at Devil's Den, A True Story, that details Terry's extraordinary UFO abduction back in 1987 from a fast-moving motorcycle that he was riding when he was instantly picked up right into a huge UFO craft. After this broadcast, you can see that whole report with images and illustrations with an easy link from the top of the news headlines at Earthfiles. You just go to www.earthfiles.com and there will be the Terry Lovelace 3-part, and you just click on that link and it will take you to part 1, and at the bottom of part 1 it goes to part 2, the bottom of part 2 it goes to part 3, and then you can come back to part 1. It is a fascinating report, and so now is his new book, a second evolution from the first. And this one, which just came out in December of 2020, is called Devil's Den, The Reckoning. It has stayed in the top 10 books listed in Amazon since its release. Chapter 4 has a surprising revelation. A female gray human hybrid that Terry knew from his childhood surprised him with a face-to-face visit inside of his Texas home, first in October of 2017. He calls her Betty, and she had some profound insights about the alien presence on Earth to share with Terry. And then, to his astonishment, Betty emerged for a second time inside his Garland, Texas home on November 19th, 2020, only 2.5 months ago. This week, Terry Lovelace and I had another in-depth discussion about Betty's revelations concerning alien agendas, a secret American space program, ancient bases inside our moon, Earth, and Mars, plus an uncertain future for Homo sapiens sapient. He begins with a description of his first meeting 3 years ago with the gray-blue skin, non-human, that he calls Betty.
It was third week in October 2017. I woke up in my living room between 2 and 3 a.m. And I open my eyes and I'm seated in my chair that I normally sit in. I am shocked because I've never sleepwalked. I did not remember going to sleep there. I went to sleep in my bed beside my wife, and I woke up in the living room. That confused me. And I glanced at the alarm system. That was the first thing that caught my eye. The alarm system was intact. And then the next thing that caught my eye was this woman seated across from me, maybe 12 feet away. And she is sitting with her legs crossed, and her arms are resting on one in her lap and one on the arm of the chair in a very relaxed position, non-threatening. She has on an ill-fitting, ill-kept black, it looks like a cheap, almost like a costume-type wig. And this wig is sitting askew on top of her head, sideways kind of. She has on a pair of large black sunglasses that are jammed up underneath this tight-fitting wig to stay on her face because she doesn't have ears. She had a pencil-thin neck. There's a YouTube video called Skinny Bob. She looks very much like Skinny Bob. And she had a bulbous back to her head that you really don't notice unless you see it from behind or she bends her head forward. But there's a bulbous back to her head. Her cranium's larger than a human being. And see, it's not a human being. Her complexion was, I wouldn't exactly call it gray. I think I call it ashen, maybe a little bit of cyanosis, maybe a hint of blue. So kind of a blue-gray.
And is the gray the color of a sidewalk?
Maybe just one tone darker. She had on a red scarf tied around her neck, trying to disguise a pencil-thin neck. She had on what looked like a cotton blouse, but it was made with long sleeves because her arms were disproportionately long. And protruding from the sleeve, I could see 4 long fingers. And I couldn't see a thumb, but it could have been tucked in back of those 4 fingers.
Did the fingers have nails at the ends?
No, but I recall them having little circles, almost like little...
Suction pads.
Yeah.
I've had people draw suction pads at the end of gray fingers.
That's what I saw.
Now, this is who is sitting in front of you in October of 2017.
Yes.
We worked together on a series of interviews for Earthfiles.com. And then when I talked with you on February 8th about your new book, I was amazed to learn that an important section is that Betty came to you again in the matter world in November of 2020, only a few weeks ago.
That's exactly right.
So what happened? How did the physical appearance of Betty occur this time? And then let's go into the content page by page.
Okay. I was seated in this setting where I am now, working on my computer, and I was aware of some motion to my left. And I turned, and I felt that sedated feeling again. I felt under some type of influence.
Abductees say that they are aware that something is happening to them that seems to be from the outside under the control of the beings, of calming them to where they don't want to react.
That's exactly where I was.
And the date is November 19th, 2020, and we are speaking on February 9th, 2021, only a few weeks later.
That is correct.
What happens?
I turned to my left, and she had on the wig. I'm glad to see you.
Do you say that out loud?
No, I thought that mentally.
You switch into telepathy with her.
Immediately, yes, and it feels as natural as any conversation I've ever had in my life.
And what are her first telepathic thoughts back to you?
It's nice to see you, Terry.
And then what happens?
My next thought was, it's nice to see you too, but what are you doing in my study? And I reached over to my keyboard while I'm talking to her, and I didn't want to break my gaze with her, and I hit the number pad, and I hit 333 because my watch and the clock said 333. So that's what time it was. And I wanted to do something to record that this was an actual event and not a dream. So I thought by tapping something onto the keyboard, I was preserving the record of that and what time it was made, that this was a real event.
3:33 a.m.?
Yes.
And now start unfolding the first information that she gives you.
And she said, on February 1st, the world will change. And on February 2nd, it will be a new world. I said, does that mean disclosure? She did not answer my question.
Let's jump to the backside of the moon with the information that she has been clarifying for you in both of these meetings about the relationship of power brokers on this planet that are not necessarily Homo sapiens sapien, and that what she was communicating to you included information about the moon.
Yes, she communicated to me that the moon was a hollow vessel, that it was an artificial vessel, and that it had been placed in the orbit that it's in. It's a clue that it's an artificial object because it's a perfect fit during the solar eclipse. That eclipse totally obliterates the sun except for the corona mass that you can see around the rim.
That we're on a planet where there can be an eclipse, that the moon's shadow exactly occludes the sun and gives us these eclipses.
Right, and that there is a city, which I saw on the opposite side, the dark side of the moon, and I saw it from the vantage point of the ship. I was standing next to Betty in 1987 with my motorcycle helmet in my left hand. She was dressed in a tight-fitting gray suit. She didn't have on the wig. She didn't have on the glasses. And I recognized her as the entity that used to play with us kids when I was 4 and 5 and 6. And I knew her as Sue because she reminded me of an Asian woman in the neighborhood.
And the implication is, Terry, that the Greys focus on whether it's bloodlines or genetics, and they will begin in childhood, and there will be an evolution through life up to a certain point where there is Grey interaction at various ages, just like in your life, leading to the question, do you have the perspective now that they are allies to Homo sapiens sapien or not?
I can speak for Betty and say that Betty, I feel an affection for, and I don't think she would hurt me. She might mislead me. I don't know. I doubt it. I don't know toward what end she would do that. But I think that Betty is aligned, and she told me when she saw me in October of 2017, when she referred to the aliens as her hosts. So I think that there's a level above her, superior to her, in whatever hierarchy that they have. And I think that her job is an intermediary.
Could we go to page 124 in your new book titled The Agreement? Could you read this page?
Yes. I asked Betty plainly, does our government and your hosts work in concert? And if so, toward what end? And she answered me immediately with a slight nod of the head, and I heard telepathically, yes, they have worked together by mutual agreements since shortly before your birth. I was born in 1955.
And so 1955 would have been 10 years after the end of World War II, and Eisenhower was president, and there have always been rumors that Eisenhower met with an alien being, an extraterrestrial biological entity. Can you flesh that out a little bit more from this communication with Betty?
On this date, 1955, or sometime before my birth, President Eisenhower met with aliens at an Air Force base in California, and they did a cover story that he had a dental emergency that accounted for his absence.
But in fact, what was he doing?
He landed at this Air Force base, and on the flight line, a saucer landed, and gray aliens emerged, and they had a conversation.
And are you saying that the aliens, the extraterrestrial biological entities, or mixed with artificial intelligence that Eisenhower met with were grays and not Nordic blondes?
I would say that, absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to the next page, 125, that evolves from the Eisenhower Treaty to details about the moon, and they would relate to this treaty, I'm assuming.
Yes. Betty told me in October 2017 that we've had men and women in service to our country working on the moon. And she said some stayed there permanently and will work there in civil servant-like positions for a lifetime.
And I have been told that we have had astronauts working in an underground base on the moon since at least the early 1970s. Do you have a date that Betty gave you about when humans from Earth started working and living inside of the moon in a base there in collaboration with gray beings?
3 generations is what she told me.
Political science books call it 25 years.
Yeah.
That would be 75 subtracted from which...
Yeah, well, this is 2021, so let's just call that 21 years, almost 25.
If you took 2021 minus 75, it would be 1946, a year after the end of the war.
I think that's a very significant year.
All right, now let's go to page 127. This is information from your trip back there with Betty.
We were now squarely facing the dark side of the moon. We traveled for a long while, looking at the black below us. The ship had turned because earlier we were looking at 1 billion stars. The 1 billion stars that were in front of us were now out of sight. The landscape was black as ink. Then suddenly, scattered patches of light came into view below us. I saw free-flying discs. They were lit all around the edges, 360 degrees, and they flew in a tight V formation. And they did not land like aircraft. They lowered themselves in a swooping motion, came to a stop, and just set down on the ground and maintained that V configuration. There were towers and buildings, and some were illuminated brightly from the inside. I saw some large, heavy equipment like you would see at a mining operation. Betty pointed out a mushroom-shaped tower that she said was 1.5 kilometers in height, and that equates to just under a mile. It was difficult to gauge size and distance because from this vantage point, I would estimate our altitude at 10,000 feet, maybe a little less.
What you're saying is that Betty was pointing out a mushroom-shaped tower that was 1 mile high on the backside of the moon.
That's correct.
Wow.
And a mining operation. Something seemed odd to me when I'm looking at this city below me because there are plenty of lights. It's well lit up. And there are square buildings, too, that have square windows that look like apartment complexes or something, just like you'd see on Earth, or office buildings. But it's like cruising over LAX at night. It's this big, sprawling collection of buildings. But it looked out of place. And what looked out of place was it wasn't laid out in urban planning. There were no streets. The buildings weren't laid out in grid fashion in blocks like they are here. There were no parking lots. There were no motorways that I saw at all. So it was just a scattered collection of buildings.
And this is on the backside of our moon, and you're being shown this by Betty, who is a gray human hybrid?
Yes.
And that whole issue of hybridization, Betty has made clear to you that the grays want hybridization with humans?
That's correct. And she said that it's a project of her hosts. And I said, how long have you been taking people and doing this hybridization program? And I asked her that in October of 2017, and she said, many generations.
And why do they want to be hybridized with Homo sapiens sapien?
She didn't answer that question. She spoke in analogies, and she showed me and asked me, what does a beehive do whenever it's overpopulated or the queen dies? And I saw a mental image of bees leaving and starting at another location. And I saw that as analogous to people leaving the Earth and going either to the moon and they're transiting to Mars. She told me that we could transit from the moon to Mars in 17 hours.
In one of their craft, or?
I assume one of their craft or one of ours, because it's pretty obvious. She said plainly when she disclosed those 4 points for me that I thought were so important that people know, and that is that there is a secret space program, and that the space program that we're aware of is the public face, what they want the public to see, and it's a distraction. Real space program has been around for many years and has many things we couldn't even comprehend. We have people on Mars now. I absolutely believe that.
Yes.
And they certainly didn't get there by burning hydrogen and oxygen. I asked her, are human beings living here on the moon? And she immediately responded, yes, my people, she means the hybrids or what she refers to as her hosts. And she says, and my hosts, the aliens, also reside here, here being the moon. with humans on the surface, and there are others that reside inside the moon below the surface. Betty described the moon's subterranean inhabitants as, quote, reptilian, and said that they're possessive and territorial like humans, close quote. I asked if they are still there, and she replied yes.
If the reptilians have inhabited the core of the moon, the hollow moon, and that Betty is a gray human hybrid, how can the reptilians occupy the center of the hollow moon with gray beings such as Betty operating on the Earth and on the moon? Are the reptilians and the gray beings collaborating together?
She said yes. Betty stated further that, quote, reptilian entities live in your western desert and have since before man evolved into intelligent beings, close quote. She stunned me by stating in a matter-of-fact fashion that, quote, reptilians feed on blood from cattle. Your government has a treaty that limits the number of human beings and the number of cattle that the reptilians can take. The reptilians have no obligation to return them or agreement as to their ethical treatment. She said since the 1960s, they have failed to honor their agreed-upon limits. The number of cattle from private ranches and federal land is limited according to the conditions in the Eisenhower Accord, close quote.
And when we had done a 90-minute interview on Monday, Terry had sent me the PDF and had sent me some summaries. And one of the things that he stressed were 4 pieces of dialogue with Betty that he still says, quote, I failed to grasp the enormity of her statements at the time. She had just confirmed for me, 1, the existence of a secret space program, meaning it is real, it's been here for a long time. And as I have shared with you all in my work on Antarctica with Spartan 1 and 2, it has been out in interstellar trade since at least the 1970s. And that is the secret space program. And what else it does now beyond that knowledge of Spartan 1 and his uncle from the Pentagon, it could be that we are even in another galaxy. 2, extraterrestrials and human beings live on and inside the moon. That's also what Spartan 1 and Spartan 2 and the man I call SEAL 3 told me. We have had operations, mining operations on the moon for a long time, and that we have known that the moon is occupied in the center by, and this is the first time that anybody speaking on behalf of an interview or a discussion with a non-human has said with such emphasis that the occupiers of the moon would be reptilians, meaning saying that as a declarative sentence as if it is total fact. There's been all sorts of discussions in my professional life of, well, it could be Nordics, it could be praying mantises, it could be grays, it could be reptilians, it could be, and the lists have gone on. So this is the first time in such a definitive way in this new book and dialogue with Terry Lovelace and the gray being Betty, that there is a specific fingering of the moon, the center, the interior of the moon being direct territory of reptiles. 3, that extraterrestrials reside inside the Earth and some have free rein to abduct cattle and humans by a written agreement that is defined as a treaty that General Eisenhower, then President of the United States, signed, that has been rumored about now for decades. I have shared with all of you since that 7-hour discussion with the analyst with the Defense Intelligence Agency who met with me for 7 hours back in December of 1999. And he is the one who went into great detail about his knowledge of the huge, huge underground basins where at least the Nordics like to go deep, deep underneath the basins in the oceans. The reptilians like the desert, and that the Greys like being inside of mountains. But all of it seems to me that what the DIA guy told me December 1999 is in sync with what Betty communicated with attorney Terry Lovelace just 2.5 months ago. And 4, she inferred the existence of a global ruling council or power brokers, and let Terry know that those power brokers are not at all necessarily Homo sapiens sapien, and that they function as a global authority and decision making. And I would be hard pressed to name Homo sapiens sapien leaders who might fall in that category. So I am sharing this with you tonight because I have been very provoked by the summary that Terry gave me and the PDF of the book that just has come out, and that he is an intelligent attorney in his professional life who has been haunted since he was a boy. And that was the first abduction round in 77, and then another interaction in 87. And now that one of those beings, the female, would come back into his life 2.5 months ago in conjunction with this book that is coming out in this critical time period as we are in a pandemic. And one of the things that we didn't go into a great amount of detail, and I think it's because it's hard for all of us to consider, that Betty said that one of the reasons for the hybridization program, of which she defined herself as being a hybrid, was, quote, intended to preserve a piece of humanity. And Terry said, preserve us from what? She never made it exactly clear to him, but that he has a distinct, I guess you would say, soul-mind impression from his discussions with Betty, that right now, as so many people are saying, that this is the most critical decade, 2020 to 2030. And what happens? Will we get help to survive as a species in spite of ourselves? Or will humanity say, finally, war, tribalism, separating ourselves, it doesn't work. We need each other, and we need to be on a planet where the goals are supported by the whole. And maybe there is something about COVID. Maybe there is something that we're going through, like a very difficult birth canal. She said, told Terry, February 1st was a new world. February 2nd was bringing like a whole new world, if you can take it, which is what Philip Corso said back in 1997 and signed his book to me. Linda, a new world is coming, if you can take it. Philip J. Corso. Well, now it's not in the future. It's now. I think everybody feels it. February 1 and February 2 in the halls of infinity may have rung a bell that Earth is moving, and we sure hope it is moving the right direction. And on that, thank you for the patience. I just felt this was so important with so many confluences of so many things tonight that, Ian, we've got about 20 minutes, but I would like to know from our audience, some show of hands in the chat, do you appreciate this longer version tonight?
Okay, Linda, thank you very much. That was a fascinating interview. And having spent time with Terry myself and talked to him at length, I think that this was a really good follow-up to your previous interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to go through, first of all, thanking people for the in the super chats. We've got quite a list here, so I'll quickly run through them. Jacqueline Merkett, Melanie Meisner, Stephen Adamski, Rebecca Cole, Moonbird, Parissa Tempest, Carol Ann, Cajun Comet, Doreen Charby, Manda Panda, TNC,
Good.
Sean Mallory. So thank you very much, everybody. Linda, the audience are, I think, fascinated by the interview with Terry. And yes, I think the chat has just exploded with people saying yes, 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 yes. So I think a lot of hands are being raised here to say yes, they do appreciate the longer interviews. People do want to learn more, and this has piqued a lot of interests.
Well, one thing, just one thing to follow up, Ian, is that Terry and I sort of feel like that if Betty shows back up in his life yet again, that it may be signaling something about direct guidance, or that we're going to have closer and closer interaction with beings, and that there would be nothing to be afraid of if everybody had the experience that he has had with Betty. Not trying to make this be too sunny, but meaning maybe this is part of what is coming next. And if Terry does have another visit from Betty, this would be something for me to report, with us not knowing exactly how to have reality checks, but that a dialogue about these very important issues, which the government so far around the world are not having discussions with us. This seems almost like we have been handed kind of a separate channel where we are all able to talk with each other, and having somebody like Terry who might be bringing more information. I just somehow sense that more of this could occur. And so I'm glad that you all are provoked by this.
I think so, and I think that people want to hear more. So definitely keep us informed, Linda, if we hear any more updates, particularly about the contacts with Betty. And that actually leads into some of the questions that people are asking here. People definitely do want to learn more. They would like to know, for example, and you've touched on this in your summing up afterwards, why do you think Betty told him this information? Do you think this is in some way some disclosure that's being pushed from the from, let's say, the non-human side?
It is one of my own questions with Terry, that could there now be a sidestepping of the governments that want to weaponize UFO ETs, weaponize UFO ET technology, to the point that there has been this long 70 years of disconnect from the civilian population about what is known about non-humans interacting, where they're based, what kind of technologies they have, and that the governments, all of the governments, have wanted to weaponize whatever it is that they have had fall into their hands and keep the civilian world at a way more than arm's length distance. And now we find ourselves at this moment, and that's what I meant. If a non-human or a hybrid, as she defines herself, human and gray, takes upon herself to communicate with this attorney, and does so in what seems to be a totally acceptable, absorbable, clear, like he says, the translation or the discussion is very clear in his mind in telepathy. How many more people in the next year might start having those experiences? And that raises this other landscape. Could it be that now there is going to be another intelligence contacting Homo sapiens sapien independently in ways that are no longer considered abductions, but actual conversations, discussions, and education? Would the governments then consider that to be a provocation? And you can see how this keeps going. The dominoes either are going to end up going toward the direction that we are going to be told the truth. We are not alone in this universe. It's preposterous. And that if this year of 2021 swings open some doors where there finally is some honesty, and we don't know what's going to happen at the end of June with the 180-day countdown yet. But most people from the Pentagon side of the world think that it will be just pablum, something to quiet the masses. And there is the crux of where we all stand. We don't need pablum to quell the masses. We need truth to provoke us to take global climate change seriously, to take the pandemic seriously, to know that we are on a planet, if we don't get together to save our own species, will another civilization from someplace else actually help us? Or is this the decade where humanity on Earth ceases? Not trying to be melodramatic, just asking the existential question that seems to be in front of us, and it seems to be growing all the time. If we changed our entire relationship with each other tonight, if every human on this planet felt agape, deep love for each other as a being and a soul, how could we continue to go forward without caring about children or pollution or... So to me, something huge is occurring. Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
I think, yes, I think this is true. Amy Lou, for example, is speculating in the chat, are the aliens here, in this case, trying to protect humanity with this contact?
I think that Terry feels strongly that, as I had that dialogue about Betty and his, was there an implication that they were allies or not, is the way I ask, because we've had it laid out by remote viewers that the remote viewers get that there are friendlies, neutrals, and the hostiles that we've talked about many times. And nobody has stood up to the world and said, here's what we know about friendlies, neutrals, and hostiles. And we know, just like, strangely enough, ironically enough, the COVID coronavirus camouflages itself to get into our bodies and then spring and do terrible things. So there's always the worry that there could be different civilizations that might come as bearing gifts, and then it flips. So it's a level of where is the trust? What does our government actually know about the various non-humans? And what is the reason that other beings from the Pleiades or a galaxy that is 5 billion light years away or wherever, why would they care about what happened to the current version of surface life on this planet, keeping in mind that humanity in the current form is only about 45,000 years old. That doesn't mean that there haven't been a whole bunch of different footsteps next to dinosaurs a long time ago. But in terms of the current evolutionary pattern, we really are babies on this planet, trying to always weaponize everything. What if we knew for a fact from some civilization that could show us, here's your timelines. You do this, here's what happens. You do this, here's what happens. You do this. Well, I have interviewed people in the abduction syndrome over the last 40 years who have had experiences like that, where they've been in some kind of a craft, and the non-humans that are involved with these demonstrations are not always one type or another, which compounds the confusion. But the human is shown a screen. And in some cases, they are shown buildings blowing up, or they're shown the sky is on fire, or they're shown that the planet is covered in water. Is it a test of empathy? Is it a test of compassion? Or is it an effort on the part of some non-humans who have a vested interest, for reasons unknown, in the evolution of Homo sapiens sapien on this planet, and maybe they are honestly pulling for us for some reason. But they are not the only ones. That's why this is a 16-layered chess game. If there are even 3 non-human groups that are in conflict with each other, and we are never told the truth by our own governments, where does that leave us? That's what bothers me, and that's why I continue to try to want to do this Earthfiles YouTube channel. There is this sense, a growing sense, as we go to 163,000 and I hope 175,000 subscribers, that we can become our own channel of information that doesn't have to go through political or government filters. That may be naive, but it is as if something is so important right now that if we are not able to talk with each other honestly and feel some kind of agape group compassion and love for each other, in another 10 or 20 years, which some remote viewers have seen, Earth may not even have cities. Just think about that. Okay, Ian.
Okay. Well, yes, this is true. That you've hit the nail on the head about it being a multiple layered chess game. It's very complex. Anyone who's studied this finds that this is a vastly complex subject, and there are multiple agendas going on. Moving on from that and looking at Terry's revelations of what he's seen on the dark side of the moon, etc., on the back side of the moon, as we call it. Do you think that there's some kind of technology that the ETs, or maybe even ETs with our help, are using so that we on Earth can't see the dark side of the moon?
I was told all the way back to when I was working on that HBO project in 1983. And it was a scientist and told me, and these were his words, the moon is a machine. I heard that in 1983. The moon is a machine. It has computer equipment at the center. We know it can be also inhabited in the center, that the moon also has underneath all of the moon dust, that there is a hard constructed, I don't know whether it's metallic or what it is, but a very hard shell. And if scientists and government people knew that in 1983, then the sense of our understanding, is the moon a monitoring base for several non-humans that have been keeping a monitoring eye and ear on this planet for literally 270 or more million years. And we are the ones who don't understand the relationship of the moon to the Earth through the eyes of non-humans. Spartan 1 and Spartan 2 both had knowledge of a mining operation that the United States was doing in collaboration with non-humans on the moon. Terry and Betty, they both say it isn't just one country. It's many countries and many ETs that use the moon. And that would be another example of where what we've been taught is like a fantasy. And we are now in the process of starting to wake up. And you look at the moon now, and you look at, I do, with a sense of something that is listening and watching 24/7 all the time.
Well, what you said rings true as well in the report of some seismic equipment that was put on the moon once, and it detected apparently that the moon rang like a giant bell.
That's right.
Yeah, I expect a lot of people are familiar with that. I was reading just recently in Celestine Starr's book about the actual origin of the moon, and it seems that the moon perhaps serves many purposes, not just as a stabilizing influence on the planet, but also perhaps.
Well, I want to lay out facets, and what I'm eager is to have scientists and people who have hard knowledge and people with whistleblowers to welcome to communicate with me at earthfiles.com, because that's what we need, is people telling us what they know as hard data, and hopefully being able to substantiate it in some way, so that when I report it, I can say, here is some evidentiary material to back it up. But that's where all of this leads. It's confusion, but you know that what you've been taught is not the truth. And now we're moving into a very difficult period in this difficult decade, where what we need are facts and not being patted on the head and don't worry, we, the military industrial power brokers, we've got it all under control. That, I think, is a path we don't want to go down. I think we want to go down the path where we all keep learning more and more facts, and that we are not just putting a hand out against extraterrestrial biological entities as a big fact in this universe of many different types, and that we've got to move toward knowing the truth about this in order to survive in many ways. What about one more question, please?
Okay, yes, and I just wanted to make the point that as you always say, Linda, that you always guarantee anonymity to anyone who does come forward with any whistleblowing information. That's an important point. Okay, one more final question. What, Linda, is the most memorable investigation that you've ever done?
Boy, memorable. You just I have a kaleidoscope going through my mind. I suppose in some ways that the one that lasted for years and involved so many facets would be the RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge with John Burroughs and others. And that working with John Burroughs through hypnosis and seeing him quivering, shouting, afraid, in an office with a hypnotherapist. And what he was afraid of were lights. And humanity in general seems to be wired to be afraid of blue lights, red lights, white lights, orange lights that are coming at them in a forest or someplace. And I remember tied into that same idea that going into RAF Bentwaters took me into a lot of avenues having to do with binary code, different types of orbs, beams, and all of that. There was a scientist on the East Coast. He had been introduced to me by Bud Hopkins, and Bud was working on an investigation of what was happening to him. He owned, the man who was the subject owned a big lab in New Jersey, and he didn't want anybody to know his name, anything about his company, and none of us have violated that. But because we had met in New York and he was working with Bud, and I was by then living and working in Littleton, Colorado. And one night late, the phone rang, and it was that scientist. And he was panicked, and he said, "Linda, what do I do? There are ping pong ball lights. They're right in front of me. There are three of them. And I want them to go away, but they keep putting formulas in my head." He's telling me this on the phone. He said, "They're right there. What should I do?" I said, "Try to download the formulas. Get a notebook and a pen and download what they're showing you in your mind." He did that. And for the rest of his life to this day, he has filled up notebooks with amazing information. He still wants to be anonymous, but he has developed all kinds of technologies because he bypassed his fear of these lights. It's not easy, I understand. And we are doubly burdened with the fact that for the entire evolution of Homo sapiens sapien, if there have been extraterrestrial biological entity overseers, and we have been an experiment, it was not in their self-interest to tell us anything. And then other non-humans have come in, and it's not in their self-interest to tell us anything. So now we are in a space age with a secret space force. We are in interstellar flight out in the Milky Way galaxy, at least, perhaps others, according to military whistleblowers. And yet back here on beautiful dear Earth that is going through a troubling time, we aren't told the real truth at all. And that fundamentally is wrong, I think. That's why I do the work I do. I think it's why you are coming and why we are now feeling that something is about to break in this whole issue of finally a public statement, a confirmation that we're not alone in this universe. But then we have to use every critical piece of our left brain to whatever is reported, because we don't want to continue to be manipulated by something that then pretends to be fact and truth and is not. And I think this is the landscape we're moving into. And we need each other. We need each other to tell the truth. And for those of you out there who have military backgrounds, science backgrounds, you can communicate with me by hard mail, FedEx, proton mail, and I will keep trying to share with you all as many pieces as I can. And I'm glad to hear tonight that you appreciated Terry Lovelace's incredible experiences with a hybrid who calls themselves a human gray hybrid in a strange way. That's a big step for the confusion between humans and non-humans. So on that note, I'm going to wish you all protection from COVID. Work at protecting yourselves as these terrible variants are increasing. And I will see you here next week. Love you.
Turn on closed captions for YouTube videos by clicking the white CC button on the lower right. The default language for Linda's videos is English. If you would like to see the captions in another language, click on the white settings button next to the CC button. Select Subtitles CC and then select Auto Translate. Select a language, and the captions will now appear in that language.
Sort of gone through, and they will hold their heads. I never had a cat do that before. And they'll pull against the comb, helping me get out snarls. And I think it's the best they've ever been.